So welcome everybody, I'm Thompson Morrison. I am leading this subcommittee of the STEM Council, the STEM Investment Council. And we set up at our last council meeting 3 subcommittees, which really become the working groups for the council, with the intention that these subcommittees then come back to the council with recommendations. There was one set up around metrics, the evaluation of metrics. There was another subcommittee set up around advocacy, communication advocacy, and ours was set up around the strategic plan. And so our commission by the council was to bring together a team to help fashion and draft a strategic plan that we could bring to the council and begin to gain statewide alignment around that council. So we then went on and said, who could be a core team to help us begin to shape this, recognizing that we truly are acting as a role as servant leaders. We are representing and conduits to our greater community. And so you guys were invited to come in as our core team, and what we want to do here was to kind of go through a quick introduction for each one of us so we know who's here. Mark is then going to give us a bit of a landscape, because we're working within a larger landscape, and it's a very multifaceted landscape. So we need to understand what the environment is there. And then we're going to plunge in, and then we're going to actually start our work. And this is intended to be a very focused working group with very clear outcomes. We're not going to be sitting here talking. We're going to be doers here. So again, I'm Thompson Morrison, and Mark?
My name is Mark Lewis. I'm the director of STEM for Oregon.
Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to ask. Not only can you say where you're from, but what brings you to the table? Okay, what is the reason that you're at the table? It's not because of who we represent, but why is this important to you as a person? What brings your commitment and passion to the table?
I'm Bradford Hill, a science teacher at Southridge High School and .5 teacher on special assignment for Beaverton School District and the president of the Oregon Science Teachers Association. And say this is very important to me just for the personal connection I have to students and education.
Thank you.
Kristen Harrison, I'm the director of the Collaboratory for the Portland Metro STEM Partnership. And the reason I'm here is because I think this is an effort that so many different entities are trying really, really hard to move forward on. And as much as we can have a plan to have them work in, we can align efforts and align resources.
Hi, I'm Andrew McGough. I'm with Work Systems. And we make investments to improve the quality of the workforce in the region, and we know that there are lots of opportunities for people in these careers. They're ever growing, and we're interested in making sure that those investments are resulting in the best possible opportunities and results. So that's why I'm here.
Hey, Herb. Go ahead, Terrell.
Terrell Smith. I teach computer science at Sherwood High School, and I have several hats, but pertinent here, president of the Oregon Computer Science Teachers Association. I'm on also the Coalition for Teaching and Learning, which talks a lot about some of the STEM issues as a state committee, and I was on the STEM task force to help initially build what is now the STEM Council. And my passion is pretty much the technology and the engineering education side of STEM. So the center of STEM. And the issue of getting more programs into schools and giving kids more opportunities, particularly underrepresented in populations.
Thank you, Jerry.
I'm Jessica Howard. I'm one of the campus presidents at Portland Community College. Right now, over the Southeast Campus, which is at 82nd and Division, and also all of the workforce operations of PCC. We're very interested, as most educational institutions are, in the future of STEM and in training and teaching students in those areas. Mathematics is our biggest barrier for students who come in. At my campus alone, 94% of the students who have high school diplomas test at least one level, if not 2 or 3 or 4 levels below. And in many cases, that's because so many of them are returning from the workforce. So it's been a while since they've been in high school. It's a huge barrier. It's the number one barrier to completion. And then the whole realm of career technical education and how that is changing and morphing with STEM tech jobs and what that's going to look like. That's an area of tremendous growth and interest for us. As you suggested, we're extremely concerned about the fact that we don't have women and people of color going into STEM fields, generally speaking. And so we think it's hugely important work to try to work on that pipeline.
Hi, my name is Jill Hubbard, and I'm the STEM Network Director for the South Metro Salem STEM Partnership. I'm also a teacher at Tualatin High School. I teach engineering and computer science classes, so more in the technical realm of things. My interest, it's fairly focused, is to move the engineering and technical subjects into the core subjects to give a broader audience to those type of activities, and thereby kind of spreading that hands-on approach to more students getting them more excited about STEM.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Herb Fricky. Sorry I'm late. I'm kind of challenged with campuses and trying to get around it. Anyway, I'm with Cooper Zeitz Engineers. We were just kind of saying why we're here.
Yeah,
Okay.
what brings you to,
Yeah.
why is this important?
Yeah. As a Native American, I'm extremely interested in seeing more Native Americans get in the STEM field. It's really where my core interest lies. So far I've done pretty well. 2 of my sons are in engineering. I guess they're following in Dad's footsteps, but I want to reach out and across the state and just see what we can do.
Online, do we have any more members of the committee?
Of the committee, Craig Hudson, we're trying to connect, and Tom Thompson may also be on the line.
Craig and Tom?
Okay.
Okay.
No audio. Okay.
So did you ask them to dial in?
I did.
Okay. Okay. We will, once we bring them in, we'll take that, we'll interrupt and bring them back in on board too. So once Mark is done with that, I'm going to ask Mark to kind of help us understand the landscape a little bit, because again, we're working within a lot of different initiatives in the state. There's a lot of goodness. This is a really interesting time. We're at an inflection point. There's a lot of amazing different initiatives going on in the state. And so we need to help, as Kristen was pointing out, help align all of this so that we really have we really are transformative in our outcome. But to understand this landscape, that's where I thought Mark could kind of help us understand all the different pieces, or several of the different pieces that are going on.
Yes. Yes, and so I can't multitask,
Sorry,
so I will. I will shift. I think. Well, one, thank you all for committing your time and effort and your energy to this process. There's when we started to think about putting together a core team for this, we recognized a couple of things. One is that the number of people that we could actually invite to the table is, I could come up with a list of at least 200 people pretty darn quickly. And we started to think, okay, what are the constituencies that we need at the table? Understanding that the STEM Investment Council is made up of diverse industry sectors right now within our economy, but that there is a little, and many of them have been involved in the educational landscape for several years. At the same time, it's critical for us as we move forward to get representation from the larger ecosystem, and that includes both K-12 representation, having teachers' voice at the table to really ground ourselves in the wisdom of practice from the field, from a career and technical education, from a science classroom, from middle school to high school, to really understanding that whatever we do as a committee and as a process, whatever plan that we create needs to be grounded in that practice and in that reality. We tend to see strategic plans that are aspirational, and certainly whatever we come up with needs to be aspirational. It needs to have that common vision that represents the diverse constituencies, but in the end, it has to be actionable. And people have to see their piece and their role in actually achieving that vision and that outcome. And so we wanted not only to have the constituencies, but to have people who have that broader mindset, who understand that interconnectivity of what we're talking about. And that's why your names actually rose to the top as well. And there's several other people who weren't able to make it here as well. Callie Ladd, who's from the Cairo School, working in the early learning space, doing some really innovative things in terms of trying to establish a school in Northeast Portland to reach out to our communities of color, but around the notion of playful inquiry as the foundation of that approach and that connectivity to the parents and the broader community, a former Peace Corps volunteer, so we have a connection there amongst us as well. Tom Thompson should be on the phone. He's traveling right now representing career and technical education in the Department of Education. Craig Hudson, who's been very involved in these STEM efforts, bringing an additional STEM industry perspective to the table. And I'm Melissa Goff from Portland Public Schools from an administrative perspective. Also, Kyle Ritchie Knoll from Oregon Business Council and sort of the facilitator of the STEM Employers Coalition. And I'm forgetting. Umatilla Superintendent Heidi Sipe, who is also should be at the table. And we recognize that later on in this program we're going to ask for some additional thoughts from you about who else should be participating in this sort of core team, recognizing straight away that we need broader representation in terms of ethnic diversity at the table here for this conversation. So I want to put that and own that out on the table right now, and I've got some queries out, but I could use your help in that. As Thompson said, that this landscape is quite broad. And we should acknowledge that there's been a tremendous amount of work in Oregon to date around STEM, and we're joining a work in progress. And so our task is to bring greater coherency around those efforts, and each of those efforts have moved our landscape and made it a lot richer. We've had the STEM task force. We had ETIC prior to the STEM task force, who was really breaking ground in terms of industry, education, relationships, and investments in the post-secondary environment. The task force who really laid the foundation for the STEM Council as well. The great work of the Portland Metro STEM Partnership and the South Metro STEM Partnerships to get things off the ground. We've had math and science partnerships in the state. We've had a tremendous amount of work in the out-of-school time space or the expanded learning opportunities. Ding! I got it, Joe. Thank you. Space. Oregon Ask has been a strong player. We've had 4-H. We've had the Boys and Girls Clubs. We've had Future Farmers. We've had a number of different efforts, and most recently the launch of the Northwest Girls Collaborative around STEM. That's an important piece of this landscape that we need to be mindful of. The Department of Education with Carla Wade and Tom Thompson and Cheryl Kleckner and others really had started early on within the Department of Education to lay out some philosophical shifts in how we should be approaching career and technical education, science education, and mathematics education to make it a lot more hands-on, minds-on, more contextualized, and have created a framework that was launched in 2011 and distributed to you. That's an important piece of work. Our CTE revitalization efforts in the state, making stronger connections to workforce and economic development and regional efforts. Very, very important here. So, and then within the context of the STEM Council itself, we're also talking about creating a cross-institutional research consortium in Oregon across our 4-year public and private universities to align a STEM education research agenda around the outcomes that will be tied to this strategic plan and tied to the STEM hubs directly from the STEM hubs. and connecting, again, research and practice. And these are things that, as I am just coming back from a couple of days in Columbus, Ohio, with teams from 19 other states across the country, including Guam, as well as the most recent participant in this multi-state network. I see that we've got so much opportunity here in Oregon that other states just, I'm not seeing in the other states. They might have bigger backing from some of their industry personnel. They might have some networks of STEM schools in their state. But in terms of systemic transformation and trying to do this in a very rich and complex fashion, I'm not quite honestly seeing it. We're seeing nonprofits outside of the education system. We're seeing post-secondary institutions driving that in their states, but very, very few are trying to do it from within the system to break down those barriers between the formal system and the broader ecosystem in terms of out-of-school time providers and others. So I'm super excited by this work. We are program rich. We have to be systems rich as well through this process. So, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mark.
I'll try to get the other guys on the line.
I'm going to go and change the order a little bit of our agenda, because I think that we need to plunge in right away. And I think that we need to start talking about, to actually piggyback off what Mark was talking about there. When we think about a strategic plan, there are kind of some core elements. When we as a council said, well, what do we want as a strategic plan? Do we want a document? Because Mark handed out all of the best documents that he could find, about 3 or 4 of them. And they're great documents. And they're
audio here. Were you able to see?
Oh, Craig and Tom, we're hearing you now.
Hey there. We're there.
Good.
We're all there now.
Okay, great. Can we get there? Introduce.
Oh, please,
yourselves?
please, go ahead. Tom, go ahead. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Craig Hudson at Garmin, representing a little bit of the business employers as well as the South Metro to Salem STEM Hub.
Exactly.
And Tom Thompson from Oregon Department of Education.
Wonderful, thank you. And we also have Kyle, who's joined us. Kyle, can you just introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Kyle Ritchie-Noel, and I'm with the Oregon Business Council.
So, guys on the line, I assume that you didn't hear any of the audio until now. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Well, so what we did is we went through introductions of the team here, the core team. We then had, Mark then gave us an overview of the landscape in which we're working in. What we're going to do now is we're going to start actually plunging in and start talking about the elements of a strategic plan, so that we have an idea of the framework in which we want to be working in and the outcome that we hope to achieve. Because when we as a council looked at the plans, we said, do we want to produce a document? And what is really the role of this? And what we began to realize is what we really wanted was more something that would provide that aspirational alignment for the entire community that would allow and facilitate transformational change. And was not just a document in order to kind of be sit on someone's desk. This is really an agent of transformational change. So that's what the council said, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we actually achieve that? And as Mark pointed out, here in Oregon, there are things happening that are different than other states. And we have always felt ourselves in Oregon as perhaps being a little bit different. And so when we think about a strategic plan, there are several core elements of a plan that we see are really important. The first element is that we need to have a vision. We really need to have a vision that is transformational. We have to create and define what the desired state looks like, because that is the North Star. And if we're going to start iterating and evolving toward that North Star, we all have to know what that North Star is. So there has to be a vision that we define that we all go, that would be so cool. And let's all go there. And it has to be something that excites us. That is not just an incremental change, but is truly a transformational change. So if we do that, that becomes extremely empowering. Because the next aspect of that is that if we're going to start on this journey toward a vision, we have to know where we're starting from. We're starting from a foundation of values. You've got to know what the land, who are we and what do we stand for? What's important for us? Because that's what grounds us. And that's also what creates a sense of belonging, that we're all in this journey together. Because let's be frank, we are going into uncharted territory if we are truly going to be aspirational in the vision, which is exciting, but it also can get sometimes a little bit, we're going to be at the bleeding edge a little bit, which means that if we share the values and have that sense of cohesion around those values, then we know that we're all in this together, and that gives us an incredible amount of strength. Once we define those two pieces, we have to now really define goals. Because this vision is this kind of star, that North Star, right? But we have to say, in 5 years or in 3 years, we're going to be here. Sometimes in business we call it the BHAG, which is the big, hairy, audacious goal. Which is basically you set a goal that's uncomfortable. That is like, we can't get there doing the things the same way we've always done it. Because if you haven't made a goal that is really challenging, you're not going to actually have the process itself really allow for shaping. So we as a group have to begin to define these three pieces. We as a group also have to come up with understanding, okay, if that's our goal, that audacious goal, tactics, how are we going to get there? Remember Mark was talking about the piece that a lot of STEM stuff, a lot of STEM policy tends to be this, well, yeah, we really ought to be doing this, and this is really the right thing to do, and then there's kind of like, well, how are you going to make it real? We have to challenge ourselves. This is not policy stuff, this is practice. And we have to combine policy and practice. And what is the tactics that we're going to actually do to get there, and how are they all going to connect? This is where we're going to take all of these amazing assets and begin to align them and understand how it is that we leverage all of these assets toward those common tactics. The last piece that we have to do in our plan, in our strategy, is accountability. We have to go, again, in business we talk about KPIs, the key performance indicators. We have to define how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable to ourselves, to the team, to the council, to the state, to all of the citizens of the state. We have to hold ourselves accountable. I mean, this is if we don't do that, we will again have failed. So we have to say, well, we have to actually say, this is how we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and we're going to achieve that. And so if we go and put these pieces in place, we will have our marching orders. And we will know how we're going to be judging our success. So our goal as a team is to actually, within that framework, actually begin to take this apart and understand these. And so the next,
Well, I was just wanting to ask, what other aspects, we sent out a couple of examples of other strategic plans from other states. Were there other components that you saw there in terms of these kinds of pieces that would make sense to actually also include and ensure that we have as part of our strategic plan?
I have one that fits probably a bit under tactics, and that would just be defined roles so that the different stakeholders know which piece of it they own and where they can plug in. So for policymakers, for the business community, for educators.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's also where the accountability comes in, the sense of responsibility within each of those tactics. So they get assigned and everybody knows what piece they're responsible for.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'd add to that, one of the things I noticed was some of the strategic plans were 1 year, some were 3 years, some were 5 year, and that kind of shapes this process. So to have in mind what the time span is would be helpful.
Great.
Yeah. So,
Great.
Andrew, did you have a comment?
My only comment is, I think these are all way too complicated.
Here,
A lot in
here.
there.
No one would ever read this stuff. I mean, I think it needs to be very concise. If you can get it on one page, and everybody should carry it around in their pocket. They should know what we're supposed to accomplish and where we're driving in terms of those goals. I know it's hard, but these just struck me as something that, it's great exercise probably, but would likely wind up on the shelf.
Is anybody going to disagree?
Well, I think the executive summaries do what you're saying, because that's what I did, was I looked at the executive summaries to get that high level, what are the 3 things we're going to accomplish, what are the primary ways we're going to get there. But I didn't even look at the rest of it, which is, again, to your point.
Yeah, I think for me, that sense of clarity is perhaps one of those principles that we have for this, that should guide us. It should be very clear and easily understood. Yeah.
So why don't we actually delve a little bit more about those principles? What are the things, the aspects we want to make sure? Please.
Sorry, I think it's really important for us to also communicate the contextual environment or the operating environment, the current state of things as part of a strategic plan too. So given this is where we are and this is where we want to go. And I think a couple of those plans actually did a pretty good job of just summarizing what's the current state of affairs here and what's driving this. What are some of the shifts in the landscape, whether it's economics or workforce or education, that's compelling us to be doing this? And the STEM Task Force did a lot of that work previously. So I think we should try to capture some of that.
So starting with the why, is that what you're talking about?
Well, just to situate the rest of the plan in that and acknowledge the pieces that have gone forward before to lead up to this.
And Mark, I would actually argue that, and again, these are not the chapters of what we're putting together. We're not talking about this as a structure, but this is what we have to begin to understand as elements here. And I would argue that vision, that's with, you've got to know where your current state is, and you have to know where your desired state is. And those two are really important, because then you've got to say, that's the aspiration, is to move from your current state to your desired state, and both of them need to be defined. But that is where you have to have consensus around those two. So I would totally agree with that.
I also think we're going to end up with some competing goals. Like the business needs workers now. They need people in the fields now, but in communities of color, I think you have to allow some time for that to evolve and to grow. And you may not see immediate results there. So how do you balance that in the plan or priority?
Well, or how do
like
different
that.
people, different organizations in that play into the role? Like in sense of work systems may be closer to the higher point, whereas a K-12 may be in that talent development. It's not as if you're prioritizing one or the other, that you do them simultaneously. But you've got different organizations that are focused on saying, well, okay, Andrew, can your team really, your team's working on how do we get the talent into those jobs in 1 to 2 years versus how do we get those talent into the, what's our 12-year pipeline, 12 of talent development?
Maybe that's part of our tactics is to, or one of our key principles is this notion of short-term and long-term outcomes, having certain ones time-bound or ensuring we're communicating that way.
Terrell, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm always interested in efficiencies. Some of this work's already been done. I don't want to spend all our time rehashing what the task force and council did. So if there's some way to move us to a speed of success,
Right.
rather than have to go through it. So just as we do this, well, how's the table look already? What's been said? So that our work is really important and moves us to another level.
Right. And so let's talk about, let's get some of these, because these are all, so what I'm hearing, Terrell, if I could what are our current assets, in a sense? Because all of that work that's been done before is an asset, is a community asset that we have, right? So we want to make sure that we have identified our assets. We want to understand, in terms of the goals, how we are going to go and basically weave together our resources toward our goals, so that our short-term and long-term resources basically coordinate. What are some other principles that we want to, that as we start down this process?
Someone mentioned clarity.
Clarity. I think you mentioned clarity.
Someone did.
It's a combination.
Yeah. So we want to have this something that's very actionable, right? So can I put actionable down here too as another?
Tom and Craig.
Thompson, if we can interrupt for a brief second.
Please.
Craig Hudson online. If you would just ask Mark to adjust the camera a little bit, we don't really see the whiteboard very well.
Is that
So
better?
tilt it up would be great.
Can you?
Like that?
That is very close to perfect. A little bit higher would be ideal.
How's that, Craig?
A little to the left?
There you go.
Ah.
A little to the right. Well, my right, your left, I'm sorry.
Yes. Or the other direction.
Nope.
Yes.
Okay.
Bueno.
Big Bang Theory.
Excellent.
We were watching Thompson's, well, we won't go into the
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so what are some other principles that we want to actually have as we go through this process?
I mentioned inclusiveness. You know, really diverse stakeholder groups.
So we have to be inclusive of all of our community.
I don't know if this falls under anything else, but maybe it does already, but leveraging things that are going on is, I think, a key to what's happening. Being aware of how they interconnect, not repeating stuff.
So what I would say here is not only identifying, which is really kind of what I was thinking about here, which is identifying it, but you're taking it to the next step, is to actually the coordinating and leveraging what we've got. Okay. How about a sense of ownership? That we
People
all,
need to see
the whole
themselves.
community has to own the process. It's not something that is done external to us, but it is our process in our journey as a community, as much as the broader community. Is that something that makes sense? And ownership by each of the different communities, all of our communities of color, all of our geographic communities, how do we own this thing?
Collective ownership? Collective ownership?
Collective, that's a nice way to say collective ownership. I am going to be, my pen is running. Let's see this. Craig, I don't know if the red's going to be any better.
Oh, yes. It's clever. You can see it better from over here.
It started okay, and then it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought of. Okay, so collective ownership.
I'm impressed by what Massachusetts did, actually, because they're on their second iteration of their strategic plan, and this notion of being iterative and not letting perfection get in the way of getting something down and started, I think is really important for us.
The notion of revisiting.
Yes.
Understanding how these, iterative.
So we wanted principles of being iterative.
And have you mentioned, this is Martin, sorry for being late. Have you mentioned simplicity?
So clarity we have, but also simplicity is also, do we want to?
Thank you, Martin.
The reason I think simplicity, when I read these that you sent to us, Mark, I realized, what do I do if I'm a community member, not somebody who normally reads these things? What do I do with this?
Well, you can probably use it to start a fire, I don't know. I'm sorry. But simplicity, in other words, how do you make it actionable? Is that what you mean, Martin?
how do we make it
communicate.
understandable to people who normally don't think in these kinds of categories, like strategic plans?
Right.
And abstractness of it. And it can read very easily across all of them. They all have the same kind of structure in a sense, but I wonder what a practitioner on the ground would think about this. So the question becomes audience, right? Or who's the audience for this thing? And how far do you want to go with audience?
Well,
Who needs to understand and embrace it?
one
Yeah.
could argue that if our aspiration is collective ownership, then the audience has to embrace, when we define the audience, has to embrace that intention.
Right.
And so we're not just talking about the policy level within a state legislature.
That's where I was going with that.
We're talking about the teachers in the school, we're talking about community members who are doing after-school programs.
What I'm hearing is this duality of a great strategic plan. One hand, it needs to be sort of an implementation framework and vision and setting out actually what we're going to do, but it also has to be a communications document.
Yes.
Right? And so there's a huge communications role here, and that's going to be some of the bleed over into the communications and advocacy subcommittee, just like as we're looking at goals and outcomes, that has to be part of the interface with the data and metrics subcommittee as well. Yeah.
And these together, if done well, should help it resonate with an audience quickly versus reading it thinking, some of the other ones I read and thought, who has time to do this? You know, that a practitioner in the classroom would think, you know, who has time to spend writing this stuff? And that can't be what people see when they read this, because I can't believe people spend time writing this stuff. It has to be, that actually makes my work better, easier, faster, more efficient. It actually has to initially be seen immediately as an asset.
So Kristen, can I put a label on that?
Feel free.
Creative. It has to be a document that inspires creativity. It has to be something that says, wow, I can do something with that. It is something that ignites that, as opposed to...
Inspirational?
Hmm?
Inspirational?
Inspirational.
There you go.
Yeah.
And accessible, though, right?
Right.
It has to be accessible.
Yes.
And relatable too, like the community, the rural, reservation community versus an urban high school.
Everybody has to see themselves in the mirror.
So at the danger of having one document be all things to all people, I'm concerned about this a little bit, and just wondering that could we not have a plan that does its best to this, but then drill down and have some different strategies for communicating aspects of the plan to different stakeholders, so that they are able to then see a more targeted reach to out-of-school time providers, a more targeted reach to K-12, a more targeted reach to our post-secondary environment, a more targeted reach to our business and workforce and economic development folks. I'm just wondering if we might need to put different lenses on this for...
So Mark, could I?
Yeah.
When you were talking, what I was thinking is, what if we saw this essentially as a hub from which we then hang different pieces off of it?
And the Academy solved this by having the big thing, the source document, and then we had derivative products that would speak to specific audiences and extract for them what is relevant to them.
But it all tied back to the core document.
Yes, that's right.
Which is, in a sense, when you look at when you have, this is essentially kind of the mandate or the. It's interesting when the software industry was transformed in the way that we worked, because we had an old model of doing things, which was called the waterfall model. And you basically designed all your specs, and you went through this long chain of things, and you delivered. And when there was this desire to have this huge transformational change in the way that we thought about creating value, what was designed was a manifesto. And the manifesto said, this is what we believe, the Agile Manifesto. And it was important, and there's a certain time, and the open source has also developed manifestos. So I'm almost hearing here, and maybe I'm speaking totally out of turn here, but there's a center point which is kind of this piece that says this is what we believe and this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to do it. But that we see it perhaps in a structure slightly different than a policy document, which just says this is all of the different chapters and this is the normal executive summary. I'm just challenging us to think about how we communicate this. That the reason why manifestos are there is because they challenge us to break loose of our old way of thinking. And honestly, that's what we're trying to do here. This is not about a curriculum. This is about how we're preparing the talent for an inclusive, innovation-based economy, right? How do we empower all of our talent to be a part of that, all of our kids, all of our students, to really drive new wealth and drive a whole new opportunity for us. So again, is that too far out there?
You want to call it a manifesto?
That's what we did in the software industry. But I don't know if we have to do, I don't know if we can use those terms, but I'm just thinking about the role. When we were talking about this, I just kind of drew that connection.
Well, maybe what we could do within our vision and values is that manifesto piece, and then get a little more tactical and pragmatic with the rest of the document. I mean, there may be those elements that we can pull out like that.
Yeah, and then say, well, what does that mean? If we're going to achieve this, what does that mean for K-12? What does that mean for our Native American communities? What does that really mean? And how do we actually make this all happen in each of the different environments in which we've got to make this all happen?
From my perspective, when I was looking at those strategic plans, they were all presented the exact same way. Here's the superintendent, here's the executive summary, and it was so vanilla that by the end of it, I was just like, here comes another one. So something to grab attention, a little different approach, I think is an interesting way to go about things, at least to get people to look and listen a little bit.
And when you were really bored, you got to the 40-page appendix.
The appendix. Get the appendix.
So I think that we need to be creative in this process. We're not here to just create it. We're not here to create a document. We're here to really be, if we were, I don't think any of us would really, because none of us really have time to be sitting around just, that's not really what gives us life, right? But I think that we don't have to actually define what this looks like all now, but I just we ought to think about it, yeah?
I'm just wondering what the expectations are of the product we produce. Because if this is what people think strategic plan is, I mean, do you have a sense of that?
We can define the expectations.
Okay.
There is no expectations that are being imposed externally from the council. We said we need to align the entire community toward an aspirational goal that is transformative in the way that we educate our kids. So we, as a council, said this is not simply about getting more curriculum into the existing system. This is really, how do we help inspire the next generation of greatness and really and do that. And using STEM as a way to actually do that, but we see ourselves in a much larger, the opportunity here is actually not just at a curriculum level.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and from a technical standpoint, if this was written into the law, that the STEM Council would produce a STEM strategic plan, or a strategic plan for STEM education in the state. So is one of the technical audiences the OEIB? Are we producing it for them to fulfill the legislation? I'm asking this because I don't know. And that doesn't mean that should dictate any of this, but I'm just thinking from, to get to your question, I think we probably do have a responsibility to produce for the OEIB and the governor a strategic plan for STEM education.
And this is going to be a strategic,
Right.
but it doesn't say it has to look like Massachusetts.
It didn't give any other details other than that.
Right. And so that point being is that I think that we can make a creative document that speaks true to what we want to do.
It seems to me that the tremendous promise of STEM even as a concept, and something that I'm thinking it's not just about education, it's about linking, right? Because it's not just 4 disciplines, it's It's not just CTE, it's not just 2-year, it's not just 4-year, it's not just graduates, it's not just research, it's not just K-12.
Right.
It's all of those things. There is not a comparable sort of approach to linkage in the non-STEM, it's not a humanities group meeting right now, right? Because that's not being driven by industry particularly, and that is a whole different set of expectations and understandings with regard to how things are developing in the future. So it seems like we have tremendous opportunity here to think about structural things, connecting things, and not just pedagogical things, although that's extremely important. But it's that to me is, it just if you think about it long enough, it just blows your whole mind up. You think about, we're looking at this as a state, and we have all these things happening, and some things are much more aligned than others. But we have an opportunity to do the kind of connecting and high-level understanding, which is the kind of document I think you're thinking about, Andrew. That, the potential is incredible, but we really have to think. I like your approach of, sort of what is that huge aspiration, and then we come down to something concrete.
Well, and that's why the STEM Council is made up of industry people. We're all from an industry. And the reason is that it's not a matter of having workers that are better skilled. We need talent that are inspired creators of new value. We need people coming out of our system with an innovation mindset. That's why, that's what's going to drive our growth as businesses, are people who are going to come in there and say, you want me to solve that problem? I can solve that problem, and I don't know how to do it now, but I can solve it. And they're able to go grab and learn skills. They're agile, they're inventive, they're creative, right? They're skilled. But it's not the old mindset of saying, we need this set of skills because this is what, because we don't even know next year what skills we need. What we need is someone who can acquire those skills really fast. So that's why we at the STEM Council say this is not just the old model. This is not a vocational storyline. This is an issue that we need all kids graduating from our schools to have this innovation mindset that allows them not only to have a growth mindset, but they also have a maker mindset and a team mindset. That's what we need. And yes, the fact that they have these core skills are really important. But that's why, in the technology world, we talk about talent now. We don't talk about employees. We say we want, and so that's why, to your point, we're not looking at this in the old way. We're saying we have to think about this in a new way. And it's not just, let's get this curriculum in place. And that's why what Jill was talking about, how do you get this thinking, this project-based, creative problem solving to all kids in all disciplines? How do you do that? Because that's what we need. So that's how we kind of look at it from the council perspective. Herb, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of how we've been really discussing this.
Yeah, you're on time.
Can we add the concept of providing or trying to bring inspiration but also support to bear? Because I think, if I think about the players, and we have the districts and the out-of-school providers and the mentors and business, a lot of them, they need something to aspire to, but they also need supports in order to actually do things to reach that goal, to provide it. So I think the idea of helping people be inspired but also well supported to move is key versus just an aspiration or just inspired.
No, absolutely. And that's why we have to start with the aspiration piece. Mm-hmm. But our tactics are about how to create the ecosystem of success, right? If someone has an intention, how do you plug them in? How can they be plugged in? And so say someone has a desire to be a mentor. How do you take that individual and have them be successful? Well, there's a training that they need support to be successful. It's not a matter of plugging them in, but how do you be successful? That's all the pieces that we're going to have to be putting in place. Because we realize that we need to break down the walls of this classroom. There has to be a lot of open windows. So the kids see what's on the outside, and the folks on the outside see what's happening in the classroom, and we learn together. So that's one of the things that we've talked a good bit about. Is there anything else on this principles that we move forward on that are we good to kind of move on after this? Is this fairly comprehensive? I think we got a long list here.
It might be implicit, and maybe it's there from where I stand, and because I came late, I don't quite see it, is the idea that it's actor-oriented. You talk about this, you have the spokes there in your model, but the idea that but actionable is one thing, but I oftentimes miss that it's really specifically targeted towards a specific actor identified within the ecosystem that we're talking about, that then says,
Right.
it's actionable, you identify you as somebody who needs to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, maybe actionable really says that, and that's okay. But just want to keep that in mind. But oftentimes I don't find it specific
You
enough.
said that too.
People
The
can
roles.
identify
It has
themselves
to include
as
roles.
a person or institution that lives in that strategic plan.
Yeah. And can we call it defined roles in a sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got to go and say, okay, who's going to take this piece needs to be taken. There's the old organizational development model that every single tactic has to have an R and an S and can have an I on it, right? Who's got the R on that? Who's got the responsibility for that? So when an organization say, I've got that R, who's going to have an S? Who's going to support them in that, right? Who has an I? Who needs to be involved? In a sense, we've got to get to that place where we say, okay, who's got the R? That piece of that puzzle, and organizationally, and even within that, I'll take the R on that one. I'm going to do that one, and I'm going to commit to that one. Does that get us to kind of where you're going to?
That's what I define, yes.
Yeah. So we can then turn to Jill and say, okay, Jill, do you have the R for developing that platform for connecting, right? Andrew, do you have that R for that? For be able to do that training. In other words, we kind of go and say, yeah, I'll take that R.
Or at least within constituency groups,
Yeah.
like the legislative roles and the K-12 roles and
Yeah. Okay.
business industry.
Okay. So, if this is kind of the principles by which we're going to be working, why don't we take and start fashioning out the vision, that aspirational goal, that aspirational North Star, to say, wouldn't it be cool if, and this is when we get to be audacious, right? This is blue sky audacity here, right? This is transformation. How would we begin if we were all, we've been involved in this for a long time. This is really important for us. But if we were to say, wouldn't it be cool if, eliminating any barriers to that, what would it be like? What would that vision look like for us? Clearly audacious.
Everybody got into the pro school at OSU.
Capable of engaging with
What was that, Martin?
as a part of their personal and public life or job.
Can you say that again, Martin? We didn't hear you.
Oh, an Oregon where every citizen is engaged in STEM as part of their personal, public, and professional life, and has the ability to, the capacity to engage if choosing to do so.
So STEM is integrated into everybody's life as a tool set, and
it recognizes that we're not talking about just people getting jobs in STEM, that you have to be, you're a consumer, you're a voter, you're somebody who finds connections to science, technology, to math, and so on and so forth in every aspect of one's life. And we need to recognize that that's reflected in the hub idea in my mind, but it's also reflected in the mission.
so in a sense of universe. I'm going to be hard pressed for another pen here. Joe, can you help me? Yes, I can steal one somewhere because I lost this one now.
So we're talking about all Oregonians, not just students in the pipeline or next generation, Martin? Who's the who in this?
What do you mean?
Are we talking about So you were talking about an organ where everyone.
Yes.
So that to me sends two different messages. I'm wondering whether we're talking about the individuals or a state of Oregon. I mean, are we writing this toward the economic prosperity, or are we talking about the individuals or the relationship between those?
I'm talking about a healthy Oregon. I'm talking about a sustainable Oregon, about a state that is a cultural entity, an economic entity, and a social entity, where individuals relate to the overarching community that they're part of. We are, because we are charged with Oregon, take that as the boundary. We're not talking about Idaho, and it's all of them. And within that is, when we think about schooling, for instance, we need to be aware of the fact that there are parents, that there are other actors and influences. And so that's why I'm focusing on a healthy, sustainable Oregon that has everybody involved in the notion of education, because everybody's a learner.
Because everybody is a learner who's empowered with a STEM tool set.
That's correct.
So everybody is a learner. Does that go back to everybody's an innovator? That sense that that we're creating that innovation-based economy?
I would argue that everybody's an innovator and creator in their own life, depending on whether this can be small innovation, it can be big innovation. But I had that argument with Mendel's Foundation.
That everybody so
you can be a creative person in your life, on the job, or in the way you interact with others.
I would add, from a employer's perspective, our best employees are ones that are creative, innovative, and communicative.
Oh, thank you so much. So this is
You
kind
said, Craig, creative, innovative, and communicative?
Yeah, I hate to dwell on those C's. They've been kicked around in many circles, but innovation and someone that can think, dare I use the word outside the box, someone that can be innovative in how they approach problems. There's never a single solution, and so much of our K through 12 education is one solution is the only answer.
I would add to that, Craig, if I could add to that, persistence. So you're not giving up immediately, you're kind of like going for a goal.
We're getting to that word cloud that we
Yeah.
generate.
Where is it?
I confess I have not been part of a lot of these STEM conversations, so I may be throwing out stuff that is very already done or whatnot, or ground that's already been trod upon. But to me, it's about, as the gentleman said on the phone, it's about critical thinking, it's about problem solving, it's about engagement, and it's less about tool set for me. That's a more difficult thing for me, because there are a great many people who are, I've read somewhere that the majority of CEOs, regardless of the company, are humanities majors. Part of the reason that that's the case, I think, is because of their ability to communicate and critically think.
Right.
And I think when we talk about STEM, we're not talking about STEM and them. I think we're talking about an entire way of approaching the focus on innovation and connecting these aspects of mind work with industry and needs and that sort of thing, but it's more than the topics themselves, to me.
And STEM, frankly, feels like a component of that. Like, I mean, if I were to put in the middle, I would be like, business and individual prosperity is really what we're all after here, right? Economic prosperity and everyone.
For individuals and communities in the
Yeah,
state.
individuals, communities, state, whatever. So it's really about prosperity. And the assumption is if we train more people or more people have STEM skills, those are jobs that pay higher wages or create new jobs that pay higher wages. So to me, this is like transformational, but about the broader education system and delivery mechanisms. It's not just about STEM. It's about how do we deliver education services in a way that result in higher levels of creativity, more innovation, you know, all those other things. It's like, well, how does, so I'm just having a tough time pulling STEM out of that whole idea of reforming how we educate and skill people up. You know?
So I'm gonna pause here because this is a really important issue for us to address. Because are we going to focus on STEM, or are we going to focus on that larger issue that Craig was talking about and that Andrew was talking about, which is really the inspired talent, the inspired and empowered talent, which means that STEM is a piece of it, but critical thinking and all of these other aspects, you cannot say, because again, in my own mind, so you know where I'm coming from, I've never liked the term STEM, and STEAM was kind of a lame kind of extension of that, right?
And if you add the humanities, it's STEAM.
STEAM, because
That's
it's
the
looking
Yiddish
at it,
word.
in my mind, it's looking at it from the wrong direction. It's not looking at it where are we starting from? It's where do we want to go?
Yeah.
What's the, because I look at it from a business perspective. We need talent who can walk in and say, I can solve that problem for you, right? And I don't know how to do it right now, but I'm going to pull together and work with the team, and we're going to go solve that problem. And that takes a lot of different skills. Now, some of those are technical skills, but a lot of them are those critical thinking skills, and a lot of them are the communication skills and the team skills. To be able to come in, walk into an organization, and say, I can go solve that problem.
Well, and
I want to mention, this is connected to STEM because you don't have these 21st century skills independent of something that you have in it. We know that from the research very clear. You can be very critical in thinking about French literature and have a focused critical bone in your body when you think about drugs to take. So it is tied. If you want these 21st century skills, you have to tie them to something.
And just to
So it is still STEM. They're
Oh.
interconnected, but
hard
they're
to know
not
when you start.
entirely independent of one another.
And I think that I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that this is absolutely a critical literacy and a critical part of the whole solution. But the question is, are we focused at that whole, or are we just focused at the component of the whole?
So Kyle?
I was going to say, to support the point, in the business plan, which is an annual sort of roadmap, if you will, for Oregon's economy and prosperity, what we're doing is really looking at a strategy that connects education to careers. And when we meet for the business plan, which is a statewide plan with many organizations, OBC sort of runs it, but really it's all the stakeholders. We're really focused on prosperity, economic and individual prosperity. We're focused on creating jobs and raising incomes, reducing poverty, and connecting education to careers, because we see that as the key to bringing people out of poverty, which will raise incomes and create jobs. And without this holistic approach, I don't think we'll ever reach any sort of, North Star vision, because you really need that. You need that economic and individual prosperity. We happen to believe that it's STEM and CTE, and it's that economy that's going to take Oregon there.
Yeah.
So what if the entirely inclusive approach is seen as kind of a iteration 2 or an iteration 3 and focus? I'm just thinking if we look at the number of players that we all, are looking to align, and then we take STEM out and blow it open,
No boundary.
it's so
Yeah.
many entities to try to work with. So what if we, just to narrow the scope a little to everyone in STEM, what if we try to have the vision, the plan, the measurement tools to show incredible progress in that, call it a box if you want, and then use that as a model to bring others in?
But who is in the box? How do you define the box?
True.
Are the trades, is a welder in the box? Because industry
Yes.
will tell you they are. So that box is sort of morphing and the edges are getting kind of flexible, and so it's a
Agreed.
tricky one.
Agreed.
And the nature of
So-
manufacturing.
But I understand what you're saying too, though.
I think there's several things here that are really important to note. One is the challenges of the terminology in and of itself, the acronym. But we are creating a STEM plan for the state, so we are embracing that acronym. That's one of our boundaries. Okay, so that is, we're talking about STEM here. We have an opportunity to define STEM and to broaden people's notion of what STEM means. But this is a STEM plan. And if it's a foundation and if it's an entree to something larger, I fully and wholly support that. As many of you know, when I go around and talk about STEM and ask people of many audiences, not just at the STEM Leadership Summit, but I ask, what are those critical skills, dispositions, attitudes, characteristics that make one successful in STEM fields? Nowhere on there is good at math, though it should be. There's critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, persistent, grit, communicative, collaborative, a sense of agency, willing to take risks, a lifelong learner. There's thousands of terms that we should try to capture that inspirational aspect and those notions of one's personal agency and dispositions toward this, while also tying it, I think, to the bigger picture of what are we trying to. This is situated within an economic prosperity initiative, quite honestly. But it means something more to us. So our vision should try to capture and bridge those two things. Yeah.
Well, and if, as a way to get from the STEM box or whatever it is to something larger, the first comment, because your question was, what's this huge aspirational, what's the most that we can hope to do here? What's the great vision? You immediately throw the web, out as far as you can, and then of course the very first comment, and I don't know who it was, it's one of the gentlemen on the computer.
Martin, I think it was.
Yeah, said something about having STEM become an aspect of everyone's life. I think that way, sure, it's in this science, technology, engineering. It has certain places in the school system. It has certain things. That things are in boxes already.
We have some perception problems to work on. Yes.
But if through that education, and through that experience, and through linking up all the things that we have, someone is then able to approach inquiry differently and approach problems differently in every aspect of their life. That's the big goal. That's the coming out and affecting everything.
Right.
But you start here, right? This is sort of the place where it happens, but it has this tremendous all through life effect.
In a sense, it's a key that unlocks the door.
There you go.
And it's a key that unlocks the door to new possibility. And so I think working something where, again, when we started talking about this whole innovator and creator empowered with STEM tool sets, it's a whole sense that they both feel like they belong at the table. This is a world that they feel comfortable in. So that if you have that key, that's pretty empowering, right? And having that key allows kids to see envision themselves in new ways. Tara?
I work in a business that's very massive and slow to change. So when we look at this big global changing of the system, I don't have 20 years to do this. So I'm interested in focusing back to the narrow STEM concepts and create a broad vision within the narrow STEM area. And then that will begin to spill into other systems. But we can move the needle for the big system by staying focused on what we are charged to do. There is a goal statement or a goal vision statement here on this page, and it covers a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And so maybe there's a frame that will help us move to getting something down here.
Good.
I just wanted to, when I look at what's on the board and then the word vision, what's on the board to me is more attributes, but a vision is like student-centered. The program comes to the student as opposed to the student going to the innovation programs, which is the model that exists today. Certain students get it, a lot of people don't. So vision, or maybe it's just dear to me, and the vision is more access somehow has to be included in that statement to all students somehow.
Right.
Right, because I think that's practically where we've fallen short too. It's like, music is gone, shop is gone, all of this stuff that I think most of us grew up with in the public school system sort of went away. And so practically, it's like, how do you create more access to aspire to those other disciplines or those other skills,
Right.
So that goes back to the whole sense that the access is universal too. So that this is something, these are skill sets, these are mindsets that all kids have an opportunity to partake in.
But we know on solving a problem, it's not going to be a one-man job. So every problem usually has a team, and somebody on that team is usually the visionary or the kind of the big picture guy. And there's always a technician that you get involved. I mean, there's all parts of in the real world where anybody can fit into that somehow. I mean, it really can be a broad
There's
approach.
more to that than mindset or general skills. Because if you go to the liberal arts college, you get that too. What's specific about STEM here? I want to go back and say this really is within the context of certain kinds of disciplinary boundaries or topical or phenomenological boundaries.
Yeah.
But we should recognize that you can get some of the generic skills, the 21st century skills, in some other ways. And we're not saying STEM to the exclusion of other approaches towards learning and being.
Yeah, I think that I'm daunted by the whiteboard and my own piece of paper. When I'm thinking about what the vision should do, one is it's an aspirational goal, but I want to connect this thing that we have a bit of a tension between the individual, and I think that our vision needs to acknowledge and recognize and be somehow pivot on the individual while also connecting to the workforce and prosperity piece, or driving an innovation or creative economy in Oregon, or somehow connected and help make that connection between the individual's attributes and their contributions to society and their community and to a prosperous Oregon. So I think that that's the dynamic that I'm hearing across here, that it needs to contain the student and some skills and their own sense of agency, their personal life, as you said originally, Martin, they're engaged in their personal, professional, and public life. But I'm hearing these different aspects of that dynamic. Is that true? Are others hearing that same thing? Or am I off?
I think it's critical because I don't think you can have one without the other. If we don't have the prosperous economy, then we'll have people who remain in poverty, and we won't have money to invest in the schools. I mean, it's just such an interconnected relationship. So in my mind, you have to have the individual as well as the economic prosperity.
So whatever our vision statement ends up doing, it's got to connect an individual to roles within the economy and their community.
Right.
And we know we have a lot of students who are sort of caught in that opportunity gap who can't take advantage of what the economy offers them now, even. And so I think we also have an obligation to make sure that the vision addresses that particular issue.
Exactly. And that they have the access, the opportunity to be basically empowered with those. Great.
So do we want to sort of try to do an iteration on this and sort of try to go back and have a pint and mix this up and put something out for you all to then go, yeah, no, that's not the right tone, what about this on? Because I feel like we could probably swirl, or did you want to rest in this space a little longer?
No, I'm totally with you.
Okay.
I think that's where we're at. We have to go and take a draft that it will recognize that we will go and iterate this thing several times. And we don't want to overwork it, but we do have to have something to say, yeah, that feels right. That has the right aspirational feel and includes the pieces that I feel comfortable with. So we'll come back with some ideas on how that might look. And then we can go through some bunch of revs on that.
That's right.
Okay.
Can the late ask a question to you? Did you as a group talk quickly about the draft from 2011 or whatever it was that we had in our inbox and could read about Oregon STEM?
The Department of Ed.
From the Department of Education, we haven't talked specifically yet on that,
Okay.
except in terms of trying to capture key elements of what we read in different places.
Because I was curious what the group thinks about that thing. But we can do it another time.
That ties into T's comment, right, about
Right.
there's a vision here, should we start with that and see what it says? Or do you want it to be not cut and you want it to come from this group as opposed to some, I'm not sure what you had in mind with that, you know? The vision that's in the ODE draft.
First page.
I welcome insights into this as far as folks who are a part of it, or is it seen as, I mean, because if we can stand on the shoulders of giants, let's stand on the shoulders of giants. And if this thing has key areas that are missing or flaws or something, then we can know and mitigate those. So I welcome.
I think it's important to note that the Department of Education framework is written very much from a K-12 centric perspective, and I think that there's really critical elements of that in terms of framing out and envisioning a pedagogical approach and the necessary teacher supports within a system, a formal education system. So I think that we can certainly draw upon this, and one element of our strategic plan, I think, needs to be very educator-centric and support. So I think that needs to be a piece of it, but cannot embody the whole. Does that make sense? No?
I'm a teacher, so.
You're a teacher, right? Yeah. Well, this is it. I mean, for me, this is the education is the collective responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of our formal education system. It's the responsibility of everybody in our communities. It's the responsibility of our business folks. It's the responsibility of our nonprofits. It's the responsibility of our parents and grandparents and others in our community, the elders.
Policymaker.
Yeah.
Everyone has to feel their place.
Policymakers and
That's where infrastructure is built around though.
Yeah.
K-12.
It is a critical piece of the infrastructure, yes. In that ecosystem, it certainly is a critical piece of that. And this is kind of the vision, well, it isn't kind of the vision. This is the vision that we've put forward to the STEM hubs to embrace. And we want to mirror that as a state. If we're going to harness the assets of the different aspects of that ecosystem, then again, if it's just a K-12 focus, then business says, what's in it for me? And I'm tired of investing in K-12 because it's a black hole, and we've invested billions and billions and billions of dollars and hours and years and years and years of efforts, and nothing has changed, or very little has changed. And that's a legitimate concern, and it's a legitimate criticism of what has happened in our education system, knowing that there's phenomenal educators out there who are working hard every single day, and that our business folks don't understand what the education system is doing and the cultures and the constraints within that education system. Our job is to open that whole system up so that people see that we blur those lines between community and classroom in a very intentional way to get these outcomes for students. That's the only way that we're going to transform this. Honestly.
Versus the idea of skirting the system in some way and doing it outside.
We can't do it outside the system. We can't do it entirely within the system. We have to do both. That's the only way this is going to happen.
Does anybody disagree with that?
Write that down.
No, I mean.
No, yeah, please do disagree with it.
Because this is really fundamental about what we're doing here. Andrew?
No, I don't disagree with it at all. But I thought something that Herb said earlier was, it might have been Herb or Thompson, someone, but there's like these organizations and efforts on the short term. Like, I'm an employer, I need someone today. How do I deal with that? How do I fix that? It's really sort of the space that we play in, really, on the adult side. And then there is this longitudinal, sort of long, slog, transformational stuff. But there's this immediate need as well, and I don't think we...
Yeah.
And frankly, I think we often lose, we get sort of consumed by the educational enterprise,
Yes.
which you mentioned is a big old employer. It's tough to change, it takes a long time. And we all know that, but it is the infrastructure. It's not going anywhere, and we have to figure out how to make that work more effectively.
Right.
But we shouldn't lose sight of having those immediate returns, because that's what will keep business at the table, in my view.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have to know
Agreed.
that we're doing both.
Agreed.
And
But it's probably practically better to approach them somehow separately.
Well, what I'm hearing
And
from you,
learning
though,
from each other.
is this, one of the a couple of the dangers that we have in terms of barriers is this pipeline mentality, okay? And if we're really thinking about this as a pipeline, which many people do, of the formal education system, and then goes on from K-12 into community college into 4-year, or directly from K-12 into 4-year into industry, that's just not true in this day and age. It's a false paradigm, if you will. The other false paradigm is this bifurcation of our education system between the academic track and the career and technical education track. That paradigm has to be completely blown up as well.
Those
And
paradigms are extremely compelling.
they're compelling, and they're strongly embedded in our cultural mindsets and in things. And then the community college as a less than option, even in our 40-40-20. Those sorts of things, I think we have to get pretty explicit about that in terms of the context in which we're dealing with and how we're going to shift that. I mean, we don't need to if we come out swinging like I am right now, it's probably going to piss some people off, and they're going to reject it. So we need to do some things differently about that. But I see it as a huge issue, and if we're not dealing with those elements of the ecosystem in a very candid way in this room, then we're not also going to get to where I think we need to go.
But if we bring this around, not to channel what you say sometimes, data-informed decisions. I mean, if you're thinking about what you're talking about, there are certain sectors needing to hire now that can be prepped for relatively quickly, I'm assuming. If we look longer term, there are projections on where things are going to be growing. So if we're going to put opportunities in front of students to give context, that context might as well align to an industry sector that's growing versus one that's not. If we're going to give them examples, we might as well, make some data-informed decisions. So versus like STEM all the time, quick, I mean, we can actually be kind of strategic. There are things that in 5 years we have employers that need, X, and that requires a 4-year degree or a master's.
Right.
Okay, we need to back that up and say, what kids are we talking about?
So in a very simple way, you win a baseball game not only by hitting home runs, but by hitting singles, right? So you've got to know that you've got to have someone up there to go for the home run. But the singles are really important.
But I also think, and ultimately, we don't know what the jobs are going to be. And that's the whole point of STEM, right? Is that, these guys are going to be really smart to go out and create all these new jobs that none of us know about. And that's really what you're talking about, getting more people prepared to think in that really high aspiration in a way. But in the meantime, there are lots of opportunities, and we know where the growth is, and we know where big opportunities are.
Right. There are things
that
we can
support
lift up.
individual prosperity, that support economic competitiveness. So,
And I want to, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that unlike in decades of old, people are expected to have a lot more careers now. Something like 7 or 10, or many more. I think my numbers are all off, but I mean something like the first 10 years after college, students are expected to have this multiple kind of jumping around. So that again, I think we love that pipeline metaphor because it's got a beginning and it's got a track and it's got an end. But the reality is, I mean, community colleges. I think at PCC we've got something like 80% or a very large majority of our students are not coming straight from high school. And so, if and part of one of the characteristics of STEM is that it is a very rapidly changing environment, right? So we have to be thinking about this in and out and in and out and in and out, and not just this.
And I would also argue that the other paradigm is to get rid of the paradigm of the single vertical. That this is a vertical here. The technology industry is growing, therefore we need to provide.
Yes,
Fact is
that's
that it
dangerous.
is horizontal, because if you're going into farming now, you'd better be tech savvy. If you're going into public service as a cop, you'd better be tech savvy. Because every single profession now requires you to have that skill set. Look how the machine tool industry is completely being transformed right now.
Every job's a STEM job.
Every single, and I think that
How can we put that one in there?
I think that we have an opportunity here to actually challenge the paradigms and get, and to say, let's rethink this. Tara?
I'm going to defend public education for a bit. Mark and I will still go out for a beer when we're done here, but public education has been defunded by $2 billion. The bipartisan group that says what's the requirement for a quality education right now, and we're down $2 billion. And we don't talk about that much. We talk about what the education system should do to fill this pipeline, and we don't agree with right now. But the immediate and the long term can happen. And I'm a believer. I will defend the K-12 system, but I'm an innovator as well. I have large class numbers, 44, 46, and 48 students in my class. I don't see all of them, but if you come to my classroom, most of them are learning. I don't know what they're doing right now, but I hope so. The point is that we can do both, and there are some strategies that are on the ground, ready to roll, that can fill that. What can I use beside the pipeline now that we took that off the table? But we can do that immediately. I mean, within a few years, and then the long term can also happen. But folks, when our society says no, we don't want to pay that $2 billion. Now I understand that's a hard thing to do. We can't get, but we have opportunities here, and that is there's a little more funding back in the system. We've been down to bare bones and we've been struggling, and we can't, and then Common Core, and then testing, and blah, 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 folks. To not have somebody on that, I'm going to speak to this, to not have an educator on that STEM council, you want industry there, I am all for that. Industry, they support what I do. The problem is the context sometimes gets missed. And the context is when you're trying to do what you want to do with classes of 36 to 48 students in there, the best educators in the world have a hard time doing that. The defunding of education has caused those shop classes to go away. How are we going to get those back? Well, that's an immediate opportunity, because with the schools now and the administrators are beginning to think about, what can I add? Yes, there's a little bit, but what can I add? And that's the opportunity, because what we can add are the things that we want, and that's that near future success. So I'm going to defend public education. That's the game in town that's going to help us reach our points of success in the future. And I'm also going to continue to hammer, and Mark knows, every time I talk about funding. I talk about needing more. I'm talking about my colleagues preferring to change the world through 25 students versus unable to do it at all with 40 in some regards. So that's my soapbox, and I'll speak to it. And if you want me to get going, just flame me up that way. No, it's all good, though, because I am here to move this thing in all directions and do it all.
But Gerald,
Let me say this, that you never, as a former teacher and a lifelong educator, you will never have to defend public education with me. And I hope that my comments aren't viewed as an attack on public education whatsoever. I think that we need to, as we discuss this, really, particularly when we get to the tactical pieces of this, understand the barriers internal to our public education system, which is tremendous amount of noise in the system, competing initiative fatigue. There is lack of time. In terms of the U.S., in terms of the contact hours by educators, I think, Martin, you were telling me this, but the contact hours of a U.S. teacher vastly outstrip any other educator in the world, in any education system. There is no time to collaborate. So I disagree that it's necessarily funding. I do agree that there's other pieces that we attach to funding, such as teacher time, such as class size, such as equipment and resources. But that's part of the context that we need to talk about when we're really getting realistic about the implementation strategies for this, and also winning the hearts and minds of educators.
and I wanted to probably say the same thing in some slightly different way, but so Terrell's contribution and then Mark, your elaboration makes me think about this idea of, are we writing this plan within the current confines of the system, or are we saying, and if this will come to pass, here are the broader structural changes that are probably needed in order to get there in the long run. In the short run, we realize that you can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater, but in the long run, here are some of the suggestions we make to make the system itself, the rules of the game, change sufficiently to make it possible that teachers do a good job, that community organizations find enough recognition, and so on and so forth, all that kind of stuff.
So
that's a question for us.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's an important question for us.
How long into the future are we looking as a strategic plan, and how broad do we make recommendations about how not only within the system, but how the system might need to change for these visions to occur?
Right.
Is that for us to decide? I would hope so, but
Yeah.
that'll be interesting.
Does it,
Yeah,
does,
and I
does,
think
does
I
that
think we can
fit-
do
does that
whatever we
resonate?
want.
And I think it's an opportunity because as the state is looking at transforming the education system overall, I think we have an opportunity, and I've said this many times to Mark, but we have an opportunity to use STEM and the transformation of that system sort of as a model for the overall system in terms of, you know, the constituents that we involve and the support that we bring and the collective responsibility and impact. And also I just wanted to say, in terms of sort of thinking of it in a different paradigm, I think so often it's viewed as an end product, but really and those of you who are educators know a lot more about this than I do, but we know that numeracy is an even better indicator for that third grade reading than letter recognition. So that's one way where these come in. We know that when you look at the state's completion goals, both for high school and college, that these sorts of applied experiences can be a really important strategy for completion. And we know that in the end, this skill set, defined broadly, will help them, you know, into a prosperous career. So it sort of is through the whole continuum. And that's just looking at STEM and applied learning in a slightly different paradigm instead of something that we're all preparing to sort of spit out at the end. Okay, here you go, here's your STEM person.
So
Well said.
we'll go and distill all this. This is very rich, and we'll go and reflect it back out to the whole group, and then we can kind of begin to. This is we're going to be molding this thing, but we have to talk about what our next steps are as a group in the remaining time. We are putting a stake in the sand, saying we're going to be getting this thing. We're going to be done in 6 months. Okay, let's get this thing turned around in 6 months. And that means actually produce whatever it is that we're going to be producing, that guide, that plan, in 6 months' time. If we look at this in kind of an agile model, and we say, okay, let's break this down into a series of sprints. How do we do that? How do we start to compartmentalize that and say, what are we going to do in the next 6 weeks? What would the next 6 weeks sprint look like? And one of the thoughts that Mark and I were talking about this, that we saw as far as a potential first step out of the gate here to really make sure that we're hitting some of these issues about identification of assets and coordination and inclusiveness and leveraging collective ownership, is that we are connected with a whole bunch of networks, business networks, educational networks, who have all, and that if we take all of our networks and we start articulating to them, this is what we are doing, this is where we're going, leveraging work that's already been done, surveys that have done in the past, and actually go out there and do a big collective listening beyond this room. That's whole statewide, across everybody we can reach. And align people, begin to say, this is our aspiration. These are our aspirations. These are the way that we're going to, this is where we're going. Do you want to be a part of this? How can we be part of this? Pulling those assets together. And to do that collective listening, bring that back into this room so that we are able to begin to tap a lot of resources and a lot of voices as to guide us in this process. So one possibility then is that we look to actually distill this down, put together a survey instrument identify every single network that we can find that at all has anything that relate to that and push it out. And do a large statewide collective listening. So this is a strategy that I used when I was working with the Portland Development Commission for reimagining the economic development strategy for the software industry. And rather than getting a small group of people, of experts in the room, and coming up with a policy and delivering that policy to the industry, we said, what would happen if we actually went out into the industry and did a series of collective listenings? And actually community sourced the strategy by listening and reflecting. It was a very powerful process. And within 6 months, we were able to flip the entire industry around.
And I say that when we did a framework for K-12 science education, we actually took an early draft and gave it, it's not just a survey, we actually showed people what our thinking was and said, please comment on that for stakeholder input, ownership, and so on and so forth. The only problem that we had when we did this in your timeline of half a year is that people sometimes complained, because we were pushing hard for a half a year, that they complained they didn't have enough time within their networks to discuss it sufficiently and give us feedback, not just on their individual perspectives, but as a more collective perspective if they were a representative group.
What are people's thoughts on that? Because this is what the council had originally talked about too. I mean, one, a recognition that we've got some input already. We have a lot of information from the STEM Summit that I can share around from last April. We have the task force report and the work that's been done there. So we have some, while also wanting to really have people own the input. So if we did a survey, what would we ask them? Do we want to start with something to iterate off of and respond to, or do we have some broader questions that we want to get input from? So is that...
So Mark?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Beth. We have been doing an out-of-school time survey since April. So we actually have identified over 90 out-of-school time sites, so including universities, programmatic pieces with over 500 sites. And I think between what Carla and Tom have and what we have, this is a 100-question survey. We actually have quite a lot of information, and we could be very strategic if we went out. The Girls Collaborative just received some funding, and we are going to take the collaborative process out to multiple regions across the state, so that might be of some kind of support.
Great. That's fantastic.
In this idea again, I agree with Beth. There's a lot of information we probably already have, and if you want to put a stage in where a draft strategic plan gets feedback, that's probably more valuable than we put out a draft, given the information we have, and have people directly respond to what our ideas are, rather than like a foundational kind of input.
Especially the short, the 6 months timeline is pretty short, so we could really do some analysis of what we have, and then write a draft, and then take it out for feedback, where it really is inclusive in multiple sectors.
So how is it that we can begin to gather together these assets? Can we?
This is Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tom.
Yep.
Okay, and what Beth was describing, and what Martin, we actually did for that, the permanent ed piece that you were referring to and several people were referring to, we actually did exactly that, put out the draft, got feedback, and Beth alluded to that. And we do have all of the feedback still from and associated with that. So if that's helpful, we can get we still have it, and can round that up again. It's all digital, so we can round it all up again and get, see where the user question.
And those were all teachers, right, Tom?
Not necessarily. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the data to see who all was there, but it wasn't all teachers.
Okay, because there's 3 constituency groups that I don't think that we've that in my mind, I'm not sure how much information that we have from them yet. One was educators, specifically around STEM. 2 was communities of color, and 3, the students. So I'm not sure that we have garnered input from sufficiently from those 3. I think we've gotten a lot of information from the business community. The STEM Employers Coalition wrote a piece that was fed into the task force and was a companion piece to the task force. And the legislative side, we've got workforce and economic development information and data and feedback from them. So we've got an awful lot already from those places, I think.
And I think you're right, especially on the last 2 examples. I think we didn't probably get a lot of feedback, if any, from students, and definitely this was not sent out with a really clear plan of how to address diverse communities. So it was kind of thrown out there. So there's definitely some gaps in that.
I was going to ask him, who is carrying the message, though? Is this the message? Is it the governor? I mean, and it seems like you get different levels of attention based on who's taking that out there. Are we taking this to individual groups ourselves? And then how are we going to wrap that all up? Going to bring it back around? Does it just go back to this group? And then do we disseminate it out from there? I'm just kind of still trying to get a picture of what we're ultimately producing here.
Ultimately, the STEM Investment Council is working for the OEIB and the Chief Education Officer and the Governor. Being mindful that that is also means working for the legislature as well. So that's the context. We're not going to be using the governor's name to push things out on this one right now. But no, we can say it's coming from the STEM Council, yeah, for sure.
And one of my issues is that we have to make sure that we not only collect information of need, but we also have to align around vision and goals. So our desire to listen is not only to say, is this necessary? Is the need there? Because I know there's been a tremendous amount of work being done. But we have to go forth and start be presenting visions and goals against those. And say, are these the goals that we are going to be achieving? Are we going to do this together? And to align, because that's when we're able to actually make this actionable. Where people say, yes, we're all aligned, those are the goals, and then identify who's going to take responsibility for different components to fulfill those goals in terms of the tactics. So I think that we have to recognize this listening exercise can work at different dimensions. So I would argue that we need to collect all the information we have, but I think we also need to go make sure that we are starting to take a way of being able to present out and say, is this really where we're going, and is this the way we want to be going, and how are we going to get there, and be able to untap resources that we didn't know existed.
One note, thinking about the idea of clarity and communication.
If we were to take all this information that we have, distill it into and analyze it, and then create a sort of timeline and constituencies that haven't been touched with the information, go directly to them for their input. But I think that we as a group need to really firm up a timeline of actionable items.
So what are the items that we need to actually start defining? What are the tasks that we need to have in this? Is everybody okay with the idea of doing looking at this in 6 weeks? That's tangible, kind of sprint timeline.
Before Christmas, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. Hey, what the heck? So what are the tasks that we need to accomplish in the next 6 weeks? So Beth, you were mentioning this kind of review of all of the resources that we have, the kind of an audit of existing data.
Yes.
Not just an audit, but
audit and analysis.
Analysis and dissemination amongst us.
And then her comment about the constituencies that have been covered and those haven't, one of the things that worries me is we'll hit the same people when we go out there to get feedback and we're gonna miss huge.
Where are our
chunks.
blind spots?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we need to know where our blind spots are.
So in other words, the voices that have not been heard.
Yeah, identifying that.
So it's
somehow.
identification.
Voices, but also what data is missing.
Yeah, from that, yeah. Because we have workforce, we have OUS, community college, K-12 data. We have those.
Even within those sets, what information do we need?
Yeah.
Okay.
One comment that the idea that is it coming from the governor, is it coming from, I can tell you from people in STEM education, including districts, they have no idea how the STEM Council relates to the OEIB, relates to ODE, relates to Nancy Golden, relates to the legislature, the governor. They're just like, it's another. It's another. It sounds like another.
Yeah.
And so, even like your explanation of that, I was like, and this is why, and they just go, ooh, and you can just see the glaze, and they're like, I'm just not going to get it. It's just another group. And so that's why the messaging does need to be clear. And if that means we have, support from X, Y, and Z, or something to help people navigate that, because otherwise,
And not just what it is, but why it's important to them.
Recycled.
And so many educators don't even know that the STEM hubs exist. I mean, there's a sort of a plethora of lack of knowledge.
Right.
Sure, and that's, I think we need to operate with a recognition of that understanding out in that field is very limited. I mean, that's going to form the basis of our communications and advocacy work as well. So given what we do know, and given the fact that we have credibility within our networks here, that people who know us know of our work, that is a starting point, and we can personalize it in that way. I'm part of a committee to create a strategic plan for the state. We need your voice.
My administrator, the eyes glaze over when another initiative or another opportunity drops in on his desk. And even from me, when I walk in with so enthusiastic about something, he's like, oh, you know what, I've got 500 emails, I can't do this, I got Common Core, I got testing, I got parents. But if we message to him that we can help you do your job better, then he sits down and relaxes, and
we want to increase your graduation rates.
Exactly. So it is messaging, but not a hammer. And Oregon works that way a lot of times. When the evaluation framework, it was a framework, not a complete. You do it this way. It was an opportunity to build a good system within a framework. So that is a great model, and we will get the administrators, and the administrators are where our traction is. Ultimately, we do the vision, we do the policy, we create the papers, we do all this. That's important. But the traction really happens at the building administrative level, and we come in with a message that says we can help you.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to affect change.
Yeah.
So we have 10 minutes left. We have 6 weeks. What are we going to accomplish?
I'd heard that we're going to, Thompson and me perhaps, create a draft vision statement around this work and values and principles of this process and get that out as soon as possible. Me is going to get information, the STEM Leadership Summit information out to you all. Tom Thompson is getting out the data around the Department of Education draft.
Tom, did you get that?
Still there, Tom?
Or was it Beth?
And Beth is going to get the out-of-school data ASAP.
Okay.
Is that a check? Is that a check, Tom?
That's the stuff that just getting together the material, the feedback we got, what I talked about that we have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Can you do that?
Yeah. Okay.
And Beth, are you?
Yeah. Actually, just is Joe. Is that something that we can also that Joe can work with me on a little bit when she's in?
Yes.
She says yes. She'd be happy to.
And a sense of who provided that. So not just the feedback itself, but who contributed.
If someone
Yeah, we
has,
have to spreadsheet on all that, so.
if someone has deep knowledge of the document, some kind of a, this is the
Yeah.
short version of what's in it versus
Yep.
filling all of our inboxes with
Yep.
2,000 pages of stuff we need to
Right.
read and synthesize individually, I would love
Okay,
Yep.
this short.
this brings us also to how are we going to work together? We've got a lot of work and we're going to move fast. And so one of the things that Mark and I are working on right now is to create a collaborative platform for us to be able to manage our communication. So we've got a couple of ideas how we're going to do that. We're going to be, within the next week, coming back with recommendations so that we have an environment that we can go and work in that meets all of our requirements for public access, but also allows us to be agile and move fast.
It has to be a public platform, so invitation-only platforms will not work for us.
Oh, base
Under-
camp.
So,
Yeah, Basecamp
so
won't-
normally
can't
we
work.
use Basecamp, but we can't do that here.
Has to be publicly visible for public meeting laws.
I can
Because
bring
we're
a piece
official
of data
subcommittee.
regarding the state of technology, computer science, and engineering education in Oregon right now. We've got a
Excellent.
massive survey
Good.
of what's happening in the schools, and that's recent, and Tom has helped us with that.
Okay.
And we're trying to stay on top of it so we know who to, provide staff development to and market to. So I can.
State of computer science in Oregon.
Exactly.
Could you include the AP recently released AP stuff as
Yeah.
well?
So I want to know then, once we collect all of this, are we going to then identify the communities we're missing, and are we actually going to reach out to those communities? Is this going to be,
Go ahead.
well, I was just asking, are we going to, within our sprint, be able not only to identify where the holes are, but actually try to reach out to those?
I'm committed to reaching out to the commissions and communities of color to try to get representation in this process.
It's a challenging time of year to get their input.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. That's why I want to be realistic.
I need a person,
We gotta have something to
or
bring to them,
persons,
too,
multiple
though.
persons.
Need
Well,
something
So they
to bring
identify.
Didn't we say that we wanted to analyze what we have, come up with a draft, see who is missing, but then haven't directly give input to the draft rather than provide background information? That we acknowledge that we won't have all the information we need. Our big push to the outside world happens with a zero draft, like some early thing that we acknowledge is very early and requires and actually benefits from getting people's input.
So
Yes.
following Martin's thought there, is our goal in 6 weeks to have that initial draft ready for, is that what it's going to look like? Some initial framing of this. I want to know what success looks like in 6 weeks. What's realistic?
I think we could have a draft of vision, values, beginning goals,
Some
with
initial-
beginning tactics.
For
in
some
6 weeks.
initial framing.
And maybe identifications of
Yeah.
holes.
Yeah.
Right.
But not ready for public
Oh,
consumption.
no, this is not public. This-
No, but even to push out for input yet, that's not in the 6 week.
Well, that's what, so,
I think that's second 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's the second
So
we've
sprint,
learned
second
to
sprint.
sprint.
so what is it, I want to know what we are holding ourselves accountable to have for success at the end of 6 weeks.
An internal, we have a weakening.
We have an
Internal
draft that
Okay.
we're ready to kind of then look forward to taking external. But okay, so that's what we're going to commit to.
Can I just add, including tactics? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, how many of that is?
I think what I was hearing, Kristen was getting down to goals here.
Okay.
I think some tactics will come up. I would suspect we have some tactics in our minds now.
If people, perhaps we can include that for people who, particularly some of the educators, when I say educators, I'm going to be inclusive of our educators that are in the broader community. Okay, so if I say educators, I will say formal educators if I just mean teachers or faculty.
Right.
Does that make sense? So the tactics that are effective within your domains, from computing science and CTE, STEM, from Tom and Terrell on that, from science and mathematics, that would be great.
And it could just be tactics to consider.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, I don't think
this
there's any
has-
harm
and
with
this
having
has-
some initial thoughts.
And this
I can
has some
speak to sex.
Right, yeah.
But some initial, just to get
Oddly,
some started.
no.
Okay,
cheating, yes.
so if that's what we're gonna do, we're gonna do this, we're gonna gather everything in here, we're gonna find out where there's holes, we're gonna begin to draft out this, and by the end of our first sprint, we will have a draft that has been internally reviewed, that encompasses the first 3
How
parts.
about a draft for internal review?
For internal
For
review.
internal review.
So we don't actually have 6 weeks really, unless we're
I know,
all
okay,
working over
okay.
Christmas.
And
But-
We are, I'm sure, but as
Yeah,
far as
but-
officially.
Specify something important in the 6-week time frame,
Yeah,
which is this draft may have alternate versions of something because different people have different perspectives and we haven't resolved that yet. And I think we should acknowledge that in a draft.
yeah.
That's the important procedural thing.
was that?
We capture divergent thinking at this point still, and not convergent thinking, if we can agree on it.
Martin, can you repeat that, because that was an important point.
So I would argue that in 6 weeks we are still potentially divergent in our thinking, meaning there might be alternate versions of ideas or ideas that we haven't really yet figured out which one is the more important
Good.
one, and so there might be components of the draft have areas in it where we say this could be this or it could be that. We're
Yes.
not quite sure yet.
I
Wonderful.
absolutely
Thank you.
agree with that. Again, what we're doing is that this is basically going to be a kludge. We're going to combine this stuff as a first iteration just to get something formed, recognizing that not all of the issues have been thoroughly discussed, vetted, and resolved.
On relating to tactics, are we all bringing tactic ideas in, or is someone being the collector of tactics and then goes from there? Because like another hat, well, the hat I wear at Oregon Computer Science Teachers Association, we've been working on tactics to move the needle on a number of CS and engineering programs in secondary and elementary schools through code.org
Yeah.
and through our trainings and PD and everything. We have a whole strategy that I can bring to the table, and that's kind of a turnkey to a certain degree, because some of that, we've done a lot of work on that already.
Might I suggest, Joe has done a lot of this work over the years in terms of capturing some of this, that we filter our knowledge base, on some of those tactical pieces to Joe. And that includes certainly from the developmental math and community college work would be fantastic as well. We're going to need to go to public comment as well. We have one person on the line for public comment, but do we want to wrap this first?
Are we good with this, Bandit?
What Thompson and I will do is get the to-do list out from this, and I'll try to do that by Friday.
Good. Okay.
And Mark and Joe, I sent you some documents and some thoughts on the initial conversation.
Thank
In your
you.
inbox.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, can I open up now for public comment?
Yeah, Ken Fisher, are you on the line still? Or here?
Is that his question? On the note there?
No.
You're muted?
Ken, are you muted? We're not hearing you.
You only have Tom, Beth, Martin, and Seth listed online.
Yeah, Tom, that's the internal WebEx. We also have a public phone line here.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. We have too many phone lines. Okay. Hearing none.
Good wrap, and we'll be out in communication by the end of the week. Hey, thank you very much. This was
Awesome, thank
Any
you.
feedback? Was this a good start?
Yeah.
Moving in the right
Are you
direction?
on the right way?
For future meetings, will we get a week's notice, or will we
Yeah,
get more?
we're going to get more. We should set yes. Let's set the next meeting before can we do that? Or should we do that offline? Okay, how far out are we doing
All
that?
the meetings at this point, because that's what we learned at the academies. You have to schedule the meetings way in advance.
Yes.
And use the meetings that we schedule as guideposts for the speed with which we work.
What frequency do we want those? Do we want those in 2-week, 3-week, 4-week, or 6-week chunks?
Well, in order to get there in 6 weeks, do we need to, what do we have to do in between to get there in 6 weeks?
Well,
I Or the
data
6th.
as quickly as possible.
I think,
Don't make it too, if you make it too short, no work has been done in between to discuss anything about.
3
Yeah,
weeks.
I think
3 weeks?
4 is probably good,
4?
because you really only have 5 months. You have to get to a sort of finalish document by April or May. It's gonna have to push hard.
So 3 weeks or 4 weeks?
4.
The week of the 15th is better for me.
Okay,
the week of December 15th, we'll look at our next meeting.
cool.
And
Okay.
set them now for the entire period.
So
Yeah,
for,
we'll do it. We'll set up monthly meetings from here on in. Are we all good with that?
We already have the
Yeah.
17th.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
and we'll talk to the rest of the STEM Council on how that's impacting the STEM Council meetings.
Yeah.
I'll have a limit on the amount of meetings I can do.
Yeah, maybe-
Just sanity-wise, not
maybe that's
time-wise.
just a change.
Okay, thank you.